It's a bit like reading a piece of sheet music.
Right.
You can look at the notes on the page, and you understand the tempo. You see exactly how the melody is supposed to rise and fall. It makes perfect sense in your head.
Yeah, you can practically hear the song playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then someone actually hands you a violin, and they put a bow in your hand and say, well, okay, now play it.
And complete paralysis sets in. I mean, your brain knows exactly what the music should sound like, but your hands have absolutely no idea how to make that wooden instrument produce those actual sounds.
Right. It's that visceral deer-in-the-headlights panic. And if you ever tried to learn a new language, you know that exact feeling.
Oh, totally.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are unpacking that ultimate disconnect, but specifically with language learning. We've gone through a massive stack of guides, strategies, and real-life conversation blueprints to try and solve what might be the most universal frustration on Earth.
It really is.
It's that feeling of understanding a new language perfectly when you are, like, listening to a movie or reading an article, but completely freezing up, totally paralyzed, the second it is time to actually speak.
Yeah, it is an incredibly common wall to hit. And the agenda for this deep dive is to get you over that wall.
Yes, please.
We are going to explore how to transition from passive understanding to active fluency. So we'll look at the mechanics of how to literally rewire your brain, how to physically train the muscles of your mouth, and how to deploy conversational chunks.
Right.
And ultimately, how to conquer the fear of making mistakes, which is a huge one.
It is huge.
Yeah.
So let's start with that moment of paralysis, because I think a lot of us assume we just, we don't know enough words yet.
Right, we blame our vocabulary.
Exactly. But going through the materials for today, there's this phenomenon that explains what's actually happening in our heads. It's basically a mental detour.
The three-step trap.
Yeah, the three-step trap. Let's say someone asks me a question in a new language. I hear it. Then my brain frantically scrambles to translate that sentence into my native language just so I can figure out what they want.
Which is just an enormous drain on your working memory.
Huge drain. And I haven't even answered them yet. Once I understand the question in my native language, I have to formulate my response in my native language.
Right.
And then, and this is the worst part, mentally translate that response back into the target language before I can finally push the words out of my mouth.
And by the time that entire internal processing cycle finishes, the conversation has already moved on.
Totally.
You're just left standing there holding a perfectly translated sentence for a topic they stopped talking about like 5 minutes ago.
It's so embarrassing.
It requires a massive amount of cognitive energy to sustain that mental gymnastics routine, which is really why speaking feels so exhausting at first.
So the goal has to be cutting out the middleman, right? We have to bypass the native language entirely. But how do you actually do that when your native language is like the only operating system your brain really knows?
Well, you start building a direct neurological road between the physical world and the new language, and you do it on a micro scale.
Like single words.
Exactly, single words. You bypass translation by attaching the target language directly to sensory experiences.
The strategy that really stood out to me for this was treating yourself like a human labeling machine.
Yes, I love that one.
It's so simple. You walk around your house, you look at a door, and instead of thinking of your native word for door, you focus on the physical object itself. You know, the wood, the handle, and you just think the target word, door.
Right.
You look at pen, pen. You aren't translating, you're just pointing.
And the mechanism here is crucial. When you use your native language as a bridge, you're reinforcing a dependency.
Like using training wheels forever.
Exactly. By looking at the physical object and applying the new word, you are forcing the brain to associate the vocabulary with reality, not with a dictionary entry in your head.
Right.
And you can scale this up with flashcards too, but specifically picture flashcards.
Because an image doesn't require translation.
Exactly. A picture of a bright yellow sun or a red apple that's understood universally. When you look at a picture of an apple and think the English word apple, the image acts as the bridge. You completely sidestep your native tongue.
See, what blew my mind is how you can scale this up from just naming inanimate objects to actually hooking language directly into your internal physical states. It turns the whole process super dynamic.
Oh, yeah. Narrating your physical reality is where the rewiring really accelerates.
Right, like when your stomach rumbles and you feel that specific emptiness, you don't translate the concept of hunger.
No, you train yourself to feel that physical sensation and immediately think the phrase, I am hungry.
Or like lifting a glass of water. You feel the cold condensation on the glass, you feel your arm moving, and right in that split second, you just think, I drink water. It ties the language to an action, a feeling, a moment in time.
It trains the brain to fetch the language from the physical experience itself. The environment becomes the trigger for the vocabulary, which dramatically reduces the cognitive load we talked about earlier.
Because you aren't thinking about the language.
Right. You are just experiencing your life in the language.
Okay, so walking around my house, pointing at lamps and narrating my thirst is going to rewire the brain's pathways.
Yeah.
I get that part.
Good.
But it still doesn't explain why, when I finally step outside and stand in front of a real person, my mouth completely betrays me. Like, I know the word, I'm not translating it, but I still stutter.
Well, that brings us right back to your violin analogy from the start. Speaking is fundamentally a physical act. It's a sequence of highly coordinated muscle movements.
Right.
We often treat language as purely an academic exercise, We assume that if the brain acquires the data, the mouth will just naturally know how to execute it.
But knowing how a car's engine works from reading a manual doesn't mean you actually have the muscle memory to steer, brake, and accelerate smoothly on a busy highway.
Exactly. The muscles in your face, your jaw, your tongue, they have spent your entire life moving in very specific patterns to produce your native language.
Wow, yeah. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, so when you learn a new language, you are asking those muscles to contort in entirely alien ways. Knowing vocabulary in your head does not mean your mouth has the athletic training to produce those sounds fluidly.
Which means we have to literally train our face.
Yep.
And one of the primary techniques in the sources for this is shadowing.
Shadowing is fantastic. It forces that physical adaptation. You listen to a speaker, a podcast, an audio clip, a video, and you repeat what they say almost simultaneously, just like a fraction of a second behind them.
You are shadowing their voice.
Right.
But you aren't just reciting words, though.
No, not at all. You are mimicking the rhythm, the intonation, the micro pauses. You are trying to capture the underlying music of the language. It forces your articulatory muscles to move at the speed of natural speech.
Okay, I have to pause and push back on this for a second.
Sure.
Because if I am walking around my living room, echoing a podcast out loud at full volume, trying to match their exact cadence, doesn't that feel incredibly embarrassing? It sounds like a quick way to feel completely crazy.
Oh, it feels totally weird. The awkwardness is completely valid, and it is exactly why the materials emphasize creating what they call English mode.
English mode.
Yeah, you don't do this in the middle of a crowded grocery store, obviously. Your car, your shower, your empty living room, these become your safe spaces. It is a controlled environment for risk-free physical practice.
Okay, that makes sense.
So narrating your day out loud, saying things like, I am making coffee, I need a cup, the water is hot. It feels strange at first, but it serves a vital neurological purpose.
There's a specific insight in the research about this that fundamentally changed how I view speaking, actually.
Yeah.
It's the idea that the brain follows the mouth.
Yes, that is such a key concept. We usually operate under the assumption that the brain must construct a flawless sentence before granting the mouth permission to open.
Which is a recipe for the freeze response.
Exactly. By forcing your mouth to produce sounds, to actively shape the words, even when you are unsure, you are demanding that your brain fetch the necessary vocabulary faster. The physical act of speaking acts as an accelerant for the mental act of retrieval.
It's like you are forcing your brain's hand. You start talking and tell your brain, hey, we're moving, we need these words right now, catch up.
Yep.
And there's a highly practical tip to help regulate this, which I loved using the voice recorder on your phone.
It transforms your smartphone into a feedback loop.
Right. You essentially become your own teacher. You hit record, talk about your day for 60 seconds. I woke up, I ate an apple, I went to work, and then you listen back.
And it allows you to hear the mechanics of your own voice. You can catch where you stumble or mispronounce something, all without the intense judgmental pressure of an audience staring at you, waiting for you to finish.
Right. It bridges the gap between solitary practice and public conversation. But once the physical muscles are primed, the next hurdle they talk about is speed.
Speed is huge.
Because how do you string those sounds together fast enough to keep up in a real dialogue?
Yeah.
Having great pronunciation doesn't help if it takes me 10 seconds to build a single sentence.
No, it doesn't.
And this involves a major breakthrough from the strategies we reviewed. We have to stop memorizing isolated lists of single words. No more flashcards that just say cat, dog, or house.
Memorizing single words gives you raw materials, but it provides zero architectural structure.
Right.
If your vocabulary consists entirely of single words, you have to perform agonizing mental arithmetic every time you speak. You have to locate the subject, find the verb, conjugate the verb, remember the preposition.
It's too much.
And assemble it all using abstract grammar rules while the other person is just standing there waiting.
It's the ultimate cognitive bottleneck.
Yeah.
So the solution they suggest is to start learning in chunks. I love this concept. Think of conversational chunks, like pre-assembled furniture.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. If you want a chair, you don't buy raw pieces of wood, which are your single words, and a bag of screws, which are your grammar rules, and try to build the chair from scratch in the middle of a dinner party.
No, you would just buy a pre-made chair.
Exactly. A chunk is a pre-assembled phrase like, that's a good point, or, you know what I mean? Or, I was wondering if you don't have to build those sentences. You don't have to think about the grammar holding them together. You just pull the fully built phrase out of your brain and drop it right into the conversation.
And the cognitive load drops to near zero when you do that. And the most fertile ground for practicing these pre-assembled chunks is actually your daily routine.
Right, the routines.
The guides we looked at emphasize anchoring vocabulary to habitual actions. They use examples of typical morning routines, like characters named Jesse and Sarah, to demonstrate this.
The routines are so mundane, and that's the genius of it. Jesse wakes up at 6 a.m., eats toast with jam, and listens to a podcast on a 30-minute bus ride.
Very normal day.
Yeah, and Sarah hits the snooze button, stretches, eats a bowl of oatmeal, and scrolls through the news.
Every single one of those actions represents an everyday verb. Wake up, get dressed, wash the dishes, catch the bus. By attaching the target language to actions you perform universally every single day, you are building an automatic foundational vocabulary.
The physical routine itself becomes the trigger.
Exactly. You don't have to search your memory for the words because the act of making the toast automatically keys the vocabulary.
Okay, but practicing this every single day requires a serious amount of stamina, though. Learning a language is famous for causing burnout.
Oh, for sure. Burnout is the enemy.
But there is this motivational philosophy in these guides that I found really compelling. Don't stop when you're tired, stop when you're done.
Yes. Mental fatigue is inevitable in language acquisition. Your brain is expending massive amounts of energy building new neural pathways.
Right.
If you adopt a habit of stopping the moment you feel cognitive fatigue, you will literally never build sustained momentum.
But if the task is, learning an entire language, that task is never technically done. So how do you stop when you're done if the finish line doesn't actually exist?
Well, you shrink the finish line. The goal cannot be learn English today. That is just way too abstract and overwhelming.
Right, it's impossible.
The goal must be micro-sized. I will read the specific article for exactly 10 minutes. When you hit the 5-minute mark, the fatigue will set in. Your brain will beg you to open a new tab or check your phone.
Always.
The discipline is pushing through that friction to the 10-minute mark. Once you hit it, you stop. You are done.
They use a really relatable analogy about a dirty kitchen to explain how this changes our relationship with rest. Imagine it's after dinner, you are exhausted, and the sofa is practically screaming your name.
We've all been there.
Right. If you give in to the fatigue and collapse on the sofa, you wake up the next morning to a kitchen full of dirty plates, and you just feel defeated before the day even starts.
But if you push through that initial wall of fatigue, spend the 10 minutes washing the plates, and stop only when the sink is empty, the dynamic of rest completely changes.
The sofa becomes a prize. Sitting down isn't just a consequence of quitting. It is a reward you earned after completing the task.
Exactly. And applying that to language learning, finishing your 10-minute micro goal creates a dopamine hit. That feeling of completion, of being definitively done for the day, creates a positive feedback loop that makes you actually want to come back the next day.
So now that we have our pre-assembled conversational chunks and a sustainable daily practice, the true test is applying this out in the wild, dealing with the unpredictability of real human interaction.
The real world.
Yes, the real world. This is where the materials provide incredibly practical blueprints. Let's look at one of the most notoriously intimidating environments for a language learner, the restaurant.
The restaurant is a high-pressure environment because there is an expectation of a transaction, but it is also highly structured, which makes it the perfect place to deploy scripts.
Right, they break it down to remove all the guesswork. You walk in, you don't overthink it, you deploy a chunk. A table for two, please.
Boom. Simple.
Yeah. And when the waiter asks for your order, you don't just point at the menu and grunt. You use polite, pre-built frames like, I would like, or I'll have the hamburger. And to exit smoothly, you make eye contact and say, excuse me, can I have the bill, please?
What makes this so effective is that predictability lowers cortisol. When you are stressed, your body releases cortisol, which literally blocks memory retrieval.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is the biological cause of the freeze response we were talking about. By relying on a predictable, pre-assembled script, you keep your stress levels low, which keeps your memory centers open.
That is fascinating. And they take that same practical approach to navigating financial vocabulary. Because talking about money can be incredibly abstract, but they break down a budget simply as a map for your money.
Right.
It's just tracking money in, like your salary, against money out, like rent or daily coffee.
To solidify that vocabulary, they suggest turning abstract financial concepts into tangible physical actions. This is where the distinction between needs and wants comes in.
Yeah, a need is water, shelter. A want is dropping $5 on a fancy latte every morning. And the strategy they suggest to reinforce this is setting up a highly specific saving goal.
The bicycle jar.
Yes, the bicycle jar. It's an actual physical jar where you drop your daily spare change to save up for a new bicycle.
It sounds like purely financial advice, but mechanically, it is a language retention tactic. You are taking abstract English concepts, saving, budgeting, prioritizing wants versus needs, and tying them to a daily tactile routine. Every time you drop a coin in the jar, you are physically reinforcing the vocabulary.
It makes the language real.
Very real.
And speaking of making things real, nothing is more immediate than having to introduce yourself to a stranger.
Oh, boy.
The classic "tell me about yourself" question, it always makes me freeze, even in my native language. I suddenly forget everything I've ever done.
Right. It is an open-ended question, which causes a spike in cognitive load because the possibilities are infinite. You could say anything.
Yeah.
The strategy here is to artificially restrict those possibilities using a strict formula.
The formula they provide is brilliant in its simplicity. You don't need a chronological life story. You combine just 3 elements.
Yeah.
Your name, your job, and a few highly specific likes and dislikes.
Specificity is the key.
Totally. The examples they give are fantastic. Instead of just saying, "I am fine," you say you are an accountant who loves deep dish pizza and the color green, but you strongly dislike black olives, waiting in long lines and waking up before 7 a.m.
It's great because by offering vivid, specific details, you are handing the other person conversational anchor points, you reduce your own cognitive load by following the formula, and you make it incredibly easy for the other person to respond and keep the conversation flowing.
Now, keeping the conversation flowing eventually requires talking about the past, which brings us to grammar.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Right. Teaching past tense verbs usually involves staring at a miserable chart of regular versus irregular verbs. But the sources tackle this through the lens of office gossip, and it is fascinating how well it works.
Because narrative context bypasses rote memorization. Our brains are hardwired to remember stories, especially stories involving human conflict.
Exactly. So they use this story about a terrible day at work to teach the difference between regular ed verbs like worked or looked and irregular verbs like went, ate, or saw.
Right? The meeting story.
Yeah. The scene is a stressful 3-hour meeting with a demanding boss, Mr. Henderson. Because the meeting ran long, there is all this tension in the office between talkative Tom, who just won't stop chatting, and hardworking Sarah, who is desperately trying to finish her report.
The conflict engages your emotional attention.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the clever resolution to this office drama. Someone buys coffees and big chocolate cookies to broker peace between Tom and Sarah. The brilliance of this method is the distraction.
Right.
You are so invested in the interpersonal drama, wondering if Tom is going to eat Sarah's cookie, that you don't even realize your brain is absorbing complex, irregular grammatical structures.
Exactly. You aren't memorizing that the past tense of eat is ate. You are remembering that Tom ate the cookie.
Much easier.
Way easier. When language is embedded in a narrative, it slips past the brain's resistance to raw data and anchors itself right into long-term memory.
So we have the restaurant scripts to lower cortisol, we have the tangible bicycle jars, we have the introduction formulas, and we have narrative gossip for grammar.
The toolbox is full.
It's full. But if we're being honest, you can possess all the pre-assembled chunks in the world, and there is still a massive monster guarding the door.
The ultimate barrier.
Yeah, if you don't defeat this monster, you will never open your mouth. It is the deep, paralyzing fear of making mistakes,
Right.
of sounding foolish, of being judged.
It is the single biggest reason learners plateau. But the materials offer a profound cognitive reframe on this exact issue.
How so?
Well, we are conditioned by traditional education to view mistakes as inherently bad, right? A mistake is a red mark on a test. It is a failure to be avoided at all costs.
Right, obviously.
But the reality of language acquisition dictates the exact opposite. Mistakes are not your enemy. Mistakes are an absolute biological requirement.
It's hard to view a mistake as a good thing when you're, like, blushing in the middle of a cafe, though.
Sure, but consider the alternative. If you are not making mistakes, it means you are not speaking. A mistake is tangible proof that you generated enough bravery to attempt a new neurological pathway. You simply cannot build the muscle memory required for fluency without making hundreds, if not thousands, of errors.
That completely reframes the entire goal of speaking.
The golden rule established across all these strategies is simple. Communication is greater than perfection.
Say it again.
Communication is greater than perfection. We assume we must achieve perfect fluency before we can risk speaking. The truth is, fluency is the result of making mistakes, not the prerequisite.
Right.
If you string together a sentence with horrific grammar and the wrong verb tense, but the barista understands your intention and hands you the correct cup of coffee, you win. The communication was a success.
Okay, but I have to ask about accents, though, because that is a major sticking point for a lot of people.
Definitely.
I know people who refuse to speak publicly. They think, I am going to study privately. I'm going to shadow podcasts in my living room for 2 years until my accent is flawlessly neutral, and then I will debut my new language so no one can judge me.
Waiting for a perfect accent is a total trap. The consensus in the research is absolute on this. Do not hide your accent. Do not view it as a defect that needs to be scrubbed away.
But why not? Isn't a native accent the ultimate goal?
Clarity is the goal. Native perfection is an illusion. Your unique voice should be celebrated. An accent is not a mistake, it is the auditory story of where you are from.
I love that.
Yeah, it is a fundamental part of your identity. As long as your pronunciation is clear enough to be understood, your accent is something to be utilized and owned, never erased.
Your accent is the auditory story of where you are from. That is a really powerful place to land. So let's recap the journey we've taken today.
Let's do it.
We started by diagnosing the cognitive drain of the inner translator, and we rewired the brain by treating ourselves as human labeling machines to build those direct connections.
Then we moved into the physical mechanics, acknowledging that the brain follows the mouth. We used shadowing and voice recorders in the safety of English mode to build muscle memory.
And we bypassed the bottleneck of single words by deploying pre-assembled conversational chunks, tying them to our morning toast and coffee routines.
Right.
We lowered our cortisol with restaurant scripts, made vocabulary tactile with bicycle jars, and tricked our brains into learning grammar through office gossip.
And finally, we confronted the fear, recognizing that mistakes are biological necessities for growth, and that our accents are badges of identity, not errors to be corrected.
So your call to action for today is to just pull one of these tools out of the box.
Yeah.
Start incredibly small.
Yep.
Maybe you find an empty jar tonight, label it your bicycle jar and drop a coin in it. Or maybe tomorrow morning you stand alone in your kitchen and force your mouth to physically narrate the process of making your coffee out loud.
Because ultimately, this goes far beyond just acquiring a new skill. Language is not merely a tool we use to describe the world. The language we use actively constructs the way we perceive reality. When you bypass your native tongue and build these direct new linguistic connections in your brain, you are not just memorizing a list of foreign vocabulary words. You are slowly, fundamentally building a brand new second version of yourself, a version that thinks, reacts, and experiences the physical world through a completely different lens.
Which leaves you with one final question to ponder. Who is that second version of yourself going to be? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Start making those direct connections today, embrace the awkwardness of the mistakes, and we will catch you next time.